What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about 3 must-draft wide receivers that I think you guys should be looking to target in your fantasy drafts this season. I just think these guys are a little bit undervalued right now. I think they're going to end up being great picks at their current ADP. If you guys have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. If you have a different must-draft wide receiver you really like this year, also let me hear it down below. But let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off with my first must-draft wide receiver, and it's going to be Tank Dell. Now, Tank Dell is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 27, and I just do not understand the difference from Tank Dell compared to the other Texans wide receivers. So right now you have Nico Collins going off the board as the wide receiver 15, you have Stefon Diggs going off the board as the wide receiver 17, and then Tank Dell all the way down as the wide receiver 27. So you pretty much have Nico Collins as a high-end wide receiver 2, Stefon Diggs as a mid-tier wide receiver 2, and then Tank Dell is all the way down as a high-end wide receiver 3. So in my opinion, that difference is crazy, and I think you can make an argument that Tank Dell could potentially be the highest ranked. For me, he's right behind Nico Collins, but I do actually have him personally ahead of Stefon Diggs. But looking back at the 2023 season, we had 7 games where Tank Dell and Nico Collins played together and both had over a 50% snap share. So they were both healthy, they were both on the field playing together. It takes out injured games, and then it takes out week 1 where Tank Dell wasn't actually a starter yet, which makes sense because, obviously his playing time is going to be here this season. In those 7 games, Tank Dell averaged 18.8 PPR points per game, and Nico Collins averaged 18.2 PPR points per game. So this isn't like Tank Dell was way better than Nico Collins. That's not the case. But the point is that they were both amazing when they were playing together on the field. When Tank Dell was healthy, he was putting up insane production. And remember, this is a rookie wide receiver, when healthy, averaging nearly 19 PPR points per game and doing it with another top wide receiver. It's not like he was just being funneled empty targets, just racking up volume. Like, he was producing alongside another stud weapon. Now, the risk here for Tank Dell is that he's coming off a season-ending broken fibula. He was also shot this offseason, but he's reportedly healthy heading into OTAs, so it seems like the injuries aren't a massive concern. We're looking at Stefon Diggs here, who's ranked ahead of him. Diggs had a pretty significant fall-off over the second half of the 2023 season. He averaged almost 22 points per game through the first 9 games, and then under 10 PPR points per game in his last 8. He's 30 years old. He's heading into a new offense. I'm not really super confident that Diggs is just going to step in and be a better fantasy option than Tank Dell. I think we have to expect the Texans to play 3 wide receivers at an extremely high rate. I don't think this is a situation where Tank Dell is getting bumped out, playing 60% of the snaps or 60% route participation. That would just be coaching malpractice if you have these 3 stud wide receivers and they're not all on the field. I think you also have to expect the Texans to go more pass heavy. They were 15th in pass attempts per game last year, 12th in pass rate. I think it made sense. They were kind of easing, CJ Stroud into the offense. Didn't want to put too much pressure on him, but just looking at their current weapons, you have to expect they're going to be more pass heavy. So it's not like these 3 wide receivers are competing for the same amount of, targets, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. There should be more volume here, to kind of spread out the wealth between these guys. But I just don't really understand why Tank Dell is going so much later than Nico Collins and Stefon Diggs. I can't remember a time we've seen a rookie perform so impressively and then be so undervalued heading into the next season. I feel like even before they signed Stefon Diggs, Tank Dell was still going to be a value. But when he was healthy, I feel like I have to keep saying this, 18.8 PPR points per game. You do not see that out of a rookie wide receiver. Puka Nacua, insane rookie year. Obviously, he did it over the full, 16, 17 games, but he averaged 17.6. Tank Dell was up there at 18.8, slightly outproducing Nico Collins. And now we're going to be drafting that rookie wide receiver paired with CJ Stroud. They clearly have the chemistry. We're now going to draft him as a high-end wide receiver 3 because they signed Stefon Diggs. I know I'm not. I'd be willing to draft Tank Dell as a mid-tier wide receiver 2, but it looks like you're not going to have to because you can get him at a wide receiver 3 price tag. Tank Dell might be my favorite value at any position in fantasy drafts, so very, very in on Tank Dell this season. Now, my next must draft is actually going to be someone I talked about as a dynasty buy low. It's going to be Chris Godwin. He's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 41. And he's coming off a somewhat underwhelming 2023 season. I guess in terms of where he was drafted, maybe it wasn't super underwhelming, but when you compare it to Mike Evans, who smashed, it was definitely rough. And it seems like he's kind of being left for dead here heading into 2024. He averaged 12.3 PPR points per game last year, was the wide receiver 34. Mike Evans was all the way up at 16.6 points per game, the wide receiver 10. And I'm really expecting the gap between these two wide receivers to close pretty massively heading into 2024. From 2019 to 2022, we had Chris Godwin playing the big slot role. He took at least 50% of his snaps from the slot. In 2023, Dave Canales moved him primarily outside. His slot snaps fell to 24%, so he went from playing more than half his snaps in the slot to now under a fourth of his snaps in the slot. And then, like we saw, his production fell. He was a back-end wide receiver 3. From 2019 to 2022, when Godwin was in that big slot role, him and Evans were always very, very close together in points per game. You never knew which wide receiver to draft because they were just so in line. 2019, Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 2. Evans was the wide receiver 5. In 2020, Godwin was the wide receiver 15. Evans was the wide receiver 16. 2021, Godwin was the wide receiver 7. Evans was the wide receiver 10. Then 2022, Godwin was the wide receiver 15. Evans was the wide receiver 13. So the most they were separated in point per game rank was 3 spots. Godwin actually was the better guy in point per game in 3 of those 4 seasons. Dave Canales is now gone. He's now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. The new offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, has come in. He's talked about moving Godwin back into that big slot role, playing him like a Cooper Kupp. Cohen comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree, so I'm not saying he's going to give you Cooper Kupp level production, but it's good that they, want him in that role, can scheme him up some touches, get him some good looks. So I think instead of, Mike Evans being a wide receiver 1, Chris Godwin being a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, I think both of them are probably going to, come together here. Godwin's going to improve. Evans maybe slips a little bit. And I expect them both to be in like that fringe wide receiver 2 area. You could make the argument like, oh, Baker Mayfield has the chemistry with Mike Evans, but they had that chemistry within the confines of a specific offense, with Chris Godwin now being pretty much in a totally different position. I think we're going to see, just the production even out here. So I think Chris Godwin, you're getting him at a really strong value, drafting him as a wide receiver 4. And then my third and final must-draft wide receiver, actually another guy I talked about in my Dynasty buy low, it's going to be Christian Watson. He's going as a back-end wide receiver 4, the wide receiver 47. And I feel like in general, everyone seems to be really high on this Packers offense. I know I am. They looked great last year. Jordan Love, young quarterback, second year as a starter, a lot of young weapons around him. But I feel like for everyone being so in on this offense, their potential wide receiver 1 should not be being drafted as the wide receiver 4. And I feel like some people maybe are going to scoff at like potential wide receiver 1, especially with how impressive Jaden Reed was last season. But without the injuries, Christian Watson has been super impressive. We do have to point out the injuries have been a factor. His rookie year, he missed a few games early on, was kind of in and out of the lineup, but then he really put it together from week 10 to week 15. He averaged 21.6 points per game. Then he got hurt again that season. I believe it was a hip injury. Then heading into 2023, we thought he was going to take this huge year 2 leap. If he's on the field, he's going to ball out. He ends up missing the first 3 games of the season with a hamstring injury. Then he struggled until week 12. He goes 5 for 94 and a touchdown. Then the next week, he goes 7 for 71 and 2 touchdowns, but then re-injures his hamstring. So the hamstring injuries have definitely been a problem, but I feel like Christian Watson has flashed a high enough ceiling where I think the risk is worth it. Like if he gets injured, okay, you wasted a back-end wide receiver 4 pick, like it's not going to sink your team. When we're looking at this wide receiver room, it's definitely crowded. You have Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. This group definitely has a lot of talented players, but I don't feel like they have a bona fide, locked-in wide receiver 1. Like, I think Jaden Reed's a great player. I don't know if he's that guy. I feel like if Christian Watson is healthy, I think he has the best shot at being their true wide receiver 1. So on an offense that's going to be pretty impressive, a strong passing attack, if like injuries are what's, in the way of Christian Watson and being a top fantasy wide receiver, I'm willing to take that swing here at a wide receiver 47 price tag. I think it's just risk reward, and I think the reward of Christian Watson hitting just outweighs him kind of having an injury riddled season. So that's going to wrap it up for my 3 must-draft wide receivers. We had Tank Dell, Chris Godwin, Christian Watson, all guys actually going outside the top 24 wide receivers. So I think some value kind of later on in your drafts. Let me know your thoughts on these players down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.